Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Brendan O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Today, Racing Victoria's reputation under fire, plus Sir Delius withdrawal from two key spring features, a change of ownership for one of Australia's biggest stables and one of Australia's racing's biggest transport companies, what to expect from Racing New South Wales show cause hearing, what to make of the Cox Plate, inbreeding with a farewell legend in So You Think, with a special interview with Duncan Ramage, Progeny of Aussie mares remain popular in Japan, and in wagering, Tabcorp's plans start to take shape. Tim, great to have you here. Before we get stuck in, a chance to reflect on Everest Day. Both you and I were fortunate enough to attend last Saturday. A lot of positive feedback around the world about Everest Day and how did it work out for you? What were sort of your impressions of the day, and I guess how it's evolved over the last few years?
Oh, I thought it was a great day's racing. The undercard, some people thought probably wasn't as high as it has been previously in standard and horses, but the atmosphere is fantastic. Whether, 75% under age 26, I'm not sure whether that stacks up, but there's a lot of young people there. It is a party vibe where I was. I was in a good spot and I enjoyed it immensely. The Everest, CK and Rising win like he did, I thought that was, a good thing for the race. And I had thoroughly enjoyed my day at the races, and that's what it's all about from an event perspective. I think the ATC and Racing New South Wales, for that matter, deserve a lot of credit for pulling it off. And, I'm not sure if they can make it bigger, but certainly, what they've done in the 6 or 7, was at the 8th running, I think, have done a great job and sort of here to stay for sure, and one of the great race days of the year.
Yeah, it's great. They're great events. And my sentiments are quite similar, and enjoyed the day. There was nothing, it was good racing. The crowd was fine. It was big, obviously, but I don't think it was too massive. It didn't feel like you were, pardon me, it didn't feel like to me like it was like Flemington in the 1990s where you couldn't move at Derby Day. Like it felt like it was a big crowd, which is great. And it's an event, and I think they've built it up really well. And I think, we'll obviously move forward to, Melbourne probably taking more centre stage from now on in. Racing needs to continue to engage. I think the other thing I will say is, I don't know about the sort of under 25 and 60% stuff. Like, my basic view of that from looking at that didn't seem to be the case. Like, I thought it was just an ordinary race crowd in terms of, the makeup and demographics. But, that's obviously pretty key marketing message, especially from Racing New South Wales. So, but I kind of feel like racing needs to look itself in the face and go, who are we and what do we do best? And that's important as well. Obviously, attention now turns to Cox Plate Day this weekend. One of the great races and great race on the calendar. We'll have a chat about that race in a minute, but probably not the best week for Racing Victoria in terms of their own PR and how they'd like to put things, being on the front page of the paper for the wrong reason. A fair work case involving chief vet, or pretty much the head of vets there, Grace Forbes, against Racing Victoria. Grace Forbes has been on personal leave for several months now. We've been looking at that story for a bit and sort of haven't been able to get our way into it. The Herald Sun dropped her Fair Work Commission submission, which regards to bullying and harassment. Just firstly, Tim, sort of, where this sits in terms of timing and all these types of things. And people always sit there and go, oh, well, it's not fair and it's, this week and whatever else. Well, the reality is that's not getting on the front page of the paper at any time of year. Like, if you want to maximum impact for what you want to do, this is when the story comes out. As a journalist and anything else, you time your stories. So it wasn't surprising to me to see this come out. This has been bubbling away for a few months, and we're in a situation now where it's come out, and Racing Victoria probably on the back foot a little bit, and I certainly know that, having spoken to Aaron Morrison over the last couple of days, it hasn't been his easiest week in the job.
No, we've got to be careful what we say here. We'll go before the Fair Work Commission, but Grace has been the head vet for a long time. I will say she's probably hasn't had the respect of every trainer or participant in the industry. I think that's a fair comment, and that's not necessarily a slight on her, that it is a high-pressure job. You're, potentially ending, certainly in, talented horses, sort of when we talk Melbourne Cup and Spring Carnivals, ruling them out when quite often the trainers and their vets have differing opinions on that. But at the end of the day, she is the head vet of Racing Victoria, or certainly was, and has to make the call. So, that'll be unpopular at times. So it's not that unsurprising that she didn't see eye to eye with every participant. But it'd be interesting to see how the court case plays out, or the Fair Work hearing, and what actually, there's a lot of allegations in that story and documents and things like that. Whether that stands up or is proven is a different thing altogether.
Yeah, she still is the head vet of Racing Victoria. She's still employed by Racing Victoria as things stand. And this is not a unfair dismissal case. Just to clarify this, this is a ceasing bullying and harassment case. So it's actually still within the purview of her current contract. If she was to be dismissed, or if she was to sort of come to that point, that could come to an unfair dismissal thing down the line. There's a chance this could end up in further down the line to court. But what it will probably end up, and from what I'm hearing from reports, it's probably later this year, will be a Fair Work Commission hearing where Aaron Morrison will be on the stand and most likely be forced to take the stand and talk about his relationship and how that evolved with Grace Forbes. So it's a difficult situation for Racing Victoria, but, you can't sit there and say, oh, it's not fair, we're busy, we've got string carnival and all this sort of stuff. This is when this stuff's got to come out. That's why you got to make sure that you've you got your things in order. I'm not too sure what Racing Victoria could have done here to prevent this from happening, but you can't be surprised that it did happen at this time because, as we've seen over the last week, the headlines do roll out on racing. We saw in the Herald Sun overnight with, John Kanga's quite explosive comments about Tom Riley. We'll leave them alone for now, but with what went on with the MRC, it's a time of year where racing's front of page. And if you want to be on the front page for the right reason, and every other sport needs to deal with this as well, footy or anyone else, you also go on the front page for the reasons that you'd rather not be. So it's just the way things work out. And we saw last week, obviously, that comes off the back. What is interesting about this, veterinary protocols, Grace Forbes stuff with what went on is comes off the back of Sir Delius and him being ruled out from the Cox Plate and Melbourne Cup. Tim, it was a big story when it dropped last Friday. Yeah, obviously, it's changed Melbourne Cup markets. He was obviously ruled out of the Cox Plate. He was probably going to be close to favourite for the Cox Plate, if not second favourite. It's a pity to lose him for the spring, but it appears from what sort of evolved since, while there was some sort of rumours swirling around of a legal challenge to this, and the horse was going to also go to race this weekend in Sydney. That's all ended up finished up because he's now been put aside for the autumn with a view that he'll be bigger and better in 6 months' time, and probably in 12 months' time when he's back in these races, providing he gets the vet's clearance.
I know obviously there was those suggestions that they might take legal action trying to overturn the vet's decision, but I don't think there's any upside for anyone involved if they got through, because while as unlikely as it is that the horse would break down, if it did in Sydney or certainly in Melbourne, it'd be just a disaster for the industry and certainly the stable day and age. I don't think they could take that risk. The horse was absolutely flying and would have been very hard to beat in the Cox Plate and the Melbourne Cup. So it's incredibly disappointing for Sir Owen Glenn and all the rest of the owners who paid a lot of money for him. But I think at the end of the day, the right decision's been made, and the RV have to stick by their protocols. They can't back away for one horse.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that's, it's sort of an interesting situation for Aaron Morrison to be in, that on one situation he's having to defend the protocols and whatever else. On the other hand, some of the stuff that was Grace Forbes was mentioning, or that was mentioned in her submission, was that they were being too flexible in the protocols. So anyway, it's funny how it works out. Another story sort of resonated quite well this week, Tim, was your story on Archibald Racing. Rob and Annabelle, or Archibald, are effectively taking full ownership of their stable. Aquis was previously involved. Not everybody knew that, Tim. I've sort of known among few people that sort of obviously Aquis have been involved in setting up Annabelle to start with, and I think it's probably an important new era for their stable. Annabelle and Rob obviously got married earlier this year and are moving on with it, and I think it's in terms of their business and how they want to build things out, I think it's it looks like a very positive step forward.
Sure, but if you think back to 2020 when Annabelle Measham then took out her licence, she could have, as I understand it, could have gone on the licence with Kieran Maher and Dave Eustace at that time and run the Sydney stable, but she had the backing of Aquis and Tony Fung to go out on her own, not just with horses. Like she took over Moanga, she won Group 1s with, and he's at stud at New Haven now, but also financially backing and basically part owning and running the stable and the training business for Annabelle, allowing her to effectively train the horses. And now, and I guess part of the downside of that is the funds and the ownership structure would have been taking some of the clip of the 10% and the profit of the business. So now with Rob and Annabelle owning it 100%, they'll be able to, yes, they'll take on all the risk, but they'll also be able to ride all the upside. And, they've established a very successful stable in the top sort of 4 or 5 in the country, with stables in Brisbane and New South Wales and Victoria. So they won't be going anywhere anytime soon. they'll probably just keep building, and sure, it'll be challenging, but they'll keep rolling out the winners.
Yeah, and just a quick mention too, Tim, of another ownership change within IRT. Obviously, the International Racehorse Transport Company, which is very well known around the industry. You had a story yesterday that a private equity firm has bought into them.
Unfortunately, the founder, Quentin Wallace, he died earlier this year, and so the Wallace family wanted to exit the business, and they've sold their stake to a private equity firm. They call Crescent Capital. I did attempt to speak to them this week, but from what they don't like to speak to the media, or don't, and that across the board, from what I can understand, with all their investments. But Chris Burke, the managing director, did say it's business as usual. They haven't, he has a stake in it, Lockie Ford. They're not selling out. It's business as usual. It's just the Wallace family's shareholding has been on sold, and they're looking forward to the future and growing the business, particularly in probably North America and Europe, particularly. But they are the market leader down here in terms of flying, standardbreds, thoroughbreds, and equestrian horses all around the world.
Tim, we're also expected to, certainly the show course hearing is scheduled to be held this week with Racing New South Wales and the ATC. Racing New South Wales asking the ATC to show cause why they shouldn't be put in administration. Any sort of preview of what might go on there and what the timeline's like to be and what we're likely to hear?
I don't want to make any hard and fast calls on what may or may not happen.
Not on this issue.
Who you talk to. Obviously, you were at the Oak in Double Bay last week for networking purposes, and I dropped in there later on, and there's a lot of people talking about it and held great fears, that Racing New South Wales would press ahead and place ATC into administration. But at the track on Saturday, people seemed far more confident that they'll receive a fair hearing, and B, maybe they won't be placed into administration. I'm sure there might be some changes or different things, but given the way the ATC says they're going at the moment, and after a successful Everest day, that their financials are looking better, and obviously Steve McMahon's the acting CEO at the moment and pushing ahead with some ideas and moving the club forward. Yeah, it'll be just interesting to see how that plays out again tomorrow, but I'm not game to make any predictions exactly what will occur.
Had a few Friday afternoons, Tim, where 4:45 seemed like the end of the day, and 5 o'clock we were back on the keyboard smashing away, getting stuff done, and another busy time. Got a feeling tomorrow night might be another one. But just finally, Tim, I just wanted on the racing space, I want to touch on the Cox Plate this week. 9 runners, possibly 8, depending on if Globe gets through. Look, some people are saying it's probably not a great Cox Plate or whatever else, but with the exception of Sir Delius, the same horses that were going to be in the race are in the race as we thought a month ago. It's just that probably those horses haven't been quite in the form we hoped they would be.
I've always loved the Cox Plate, and I still think it is an intriguing race. Is Fair Sustina going as well as she was last year? Can she, as we know, Chris Waller's a master at peaking him on the right day. Mantino with, potentially daring tactics, and Blake Shin being able to go for 5 and 6 wide, perhaps, Maccabi Diva-esque. From years ago, I was at when Northerly won his 2 Cox Plates. I was there at Mini Valley, still among my favourite racing memories as a punter and observer, I guess. Regardless of what horses are in the race, I still think it's fantastic. We've got Eliana as a 4-year-old on the up. So, yes, you'd like to see Autumn Glow and a couple of others of the 4-year-olds be in the race, but there's always next year.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's just been the way the race has been tracking with the position of the King Charles and now the position of the Golden Eagle as well. It makes it harder for those horses. They've got plenty of choices now if they don't want to push up to that 2,000 metres, especially the 4-year-olds. So it probably has changed the nature of the race a little bit. I still think it's a great race and a fascinating race. And we probably thought last year was an epic addition to what versus Dennis stepped out and won by 8. So, the race itself can create amazing. Melbourne Cup last year was another great example of that. So, it'd be interesting to see how it pans out. There were plenty of stories out of it, and it's always a great race. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. It's been a huge month for Darley Stallions. They've been everywhere you look. Baywhack by Bivouac, taking out the Golden Rose, and War Machine, another Harry Angel flyer, too strong of a Gill Guy. Tenterus and Tempted flying the flag for Street Boss. Two Don't Hots for Shiki taking out the Jim Crack, and Gayaf making his mark with Freedom Flame and Observer. And it doesn't stop there. Darley Stallions are front and centre heading to the Golden Eagle, the Spring Champion, the Coolmore, the Victoria Derby, and the CF4. Keep an eye out. The Darley Stallions are flying. And joining us now is Duncan Ramage to reflect on the extraordinary career of So You Think, who we sadly lost this week at Coolmore Stud. Duncan, obviously a difficult week. You lose a legend like So You Think. Sort of talk us through where were you and how were you informed of what was going on with the horse over the past week or so?
Yeah, good morning, Tim and Ben. I was quite taken aback about how upset I got by losing this horse, an animal. You know, we've lost humans close to us, and it had as much impact on me as some of the closest losses I've had in family and friends over the time. And while I was aware he had a latent liver problem from back in March, which they were on top of, and then it's sort of accelerated, accumulated over last weekend with complications, internal organs, and various function problems. And the last contact I had was Tom Magnier actually FaceTimed me from Scone Vet Hospital. He played a live video of the horse, so I could see that the state that he was in just prior to being humanely euthanized. And yeah, for a noble horse, what he was even 24, 48 hours earlier than that, to see him in that state, barely being able to stand up, it was undoubtedly the right decision to end his life at that stage.
Duncan,
But
how
on that,
tough was that? So we've seen it with, Black Caviar and Peter Moody, and Luke Nolan chose not to go up and see her, but Neil Werrett spent basically 2 weeks with Black Caviar at the end. Did you feel like you wanted to drive up there and see him, or was, seeing face to face?
I think seeing him on the video with Tom was satisfying me enough that the course of action that was going to be taken was the right one. And I don't think it would have been fair to say, well, hang on, I've got to jump in the car, get 4 hours to Scone. This was late evening. He'd had to go through the next night. It wouldn't have been fair on the horse. It would just be selfish of me to ask to do that. You know, there's nothing I can do for him. So he was in the best of hands, getting the best of treatment. So, but yes, it took me back personally how upset I got. If you'd asked me to do this interview Monday or Tuesday, I don't think I would have been up to doing it.
How do you reflect on what he was able to achieve? Like he was, you say it's actually interesting, Duncan. You say obviously you have got a great connection with the horse, and obviously it's a very upsetting moment. But my own personal experience was I took a moment of reflection to think about So You Think, and having seen him race on the track and followed his progeny through. I mean, these champion horses have amazing connections, and that's what creates, makes racing an amazing game. Do you have a sense yourself and sort of like, the connection and the importance you had in the broader Australian racing and breeding community?
Well, with So You Think, and the Cox Plate has been a very good race for us over the years. I was fortunate to be very closely connected with Saintly, or him as well, So You Think. So we've had 2 different Cox Plate winners, win 3 Cox Plates between them. Both those horses were inducted into the Racing Hall of Fame. I remember going down to Adelaide with Bart and Val Cummings for the induction of Saintly. And then when So You Think was inducted in a ceremony in Brisbane, neither of those were able to go. So I was the nominee to receive the award. So I got 2 horses that I'm heavily connected to. They're in the Hall of Fame, and they're Cox Plate winners. So, that's an achievement that we're very proud of. There aren't that many horses in the Hall of Fame and what have you. But I think with So You Think, sort of pulling it back to human terms, we should reflect of how good a horse he was, but how he was also rewarded for his hard work, his endeavour, and whatever. Think in human terms, he was a sporting superstar. He played for 2 of the most elite teams. He played for Team Bart Cummings in Australia, and he played for Team Adrian O'Brien in Europe. And when he retired, he went to this luxury hotel. He had like a pillow menu. He got valets, he's got cleaners. I remember there was a film in the 80s where Eddie Murphy was in it. And what was it called? Coming to America. And he was some rich prince. And he had wipers. So You Think had wipers. That's how lucky he was as a horse. And he didn't really have to worry about social media or read his emails. His concerns was his gourmet lunch and dinner and tea coming on schedule, which of course it did, and probably thinking about which girl was going to come into his bedroom that day. That's what So You Think. That was his life. So, like anybody who works hard, is successful, there's a reward there for us all, human and animal. So he worked hard, he was elite, and he got rewarded. That's how I see So You Think.
Take us back when you bought him in 2008 at Karaka for Dado 10. 110,000, I believe. John McCardle was the underbidder, and he's bred by Mike Moran, an Aussie who's tied up with Windsor Park. And I spoke to Mike earlier this week, and he was a little bit upset as well, just losing such a champion. And he says small part, I say significant part in breeding a horse like him. But can you take us back to that day at Karaka when you bought him?
He was a November foal, been sold in a January sale. So he was super structure and frame and no furnishing. First crop, high chaparral. So he had the elements that we like, but of course you've got to trust that those elements develop and yet they end up being the horse that they are. And he certainly, he exceeded those expectations at the time, but he developed into a lovely, free-moving, gorgeous, sound athlete.
When was the sort of the word come through for Bart that, hang on, this bloke's actually something out of the box? He's not a horse that
before he had his debut, he won as a 2-year-old at Rose Hills, one of those rare Rose Hill midweek meetings. Hugh Bowman rode him, and Bart had a stakes horse in the race called Shamash. I think it was called Shamash. We knew he was pretty good. Hugh managed to sit 3 or 4 wide round Rose Hill and still win. So at that point, you knew you got a very good horse. And his next start was the Gloaming, and then he went to Melbourne after that. So, no, you knew you had a really smart horse. When those sort of horses, I did a lot, I was at the track a lot, and the vets and the trot-ups and around the stables, many hours of every day. You get a feeling for when you've got a really good horse, and he was that.
Because he couldn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but he wasn't the best at breeders. I think he was a roarer and things like that. Incredible what he's able to do, despite, if that is the case, that he didn't have full breeding.
He was diagnosed as not full function when he won his first Cox Plate, and then, as often happens with these horses, when they go for a spell, the muscles that support the larynx and all these and the nerve relax, and they go full broken winded. So when he returned to work for the autumn, he only stayed in work for about 3 or 4 weeks. It was evident that he was struggling to breathe and needed corrective surgery, which he had. And probably that surgery's made Dr. Jonathan Lumsden at Randwick Equine Centre a superstar in the medical world, because he's a tie bag horse that won 9 Group 1s after surgery in 5 continents, 3 continents, 4 countries, whatever it is. He'd be the most successful tie back surgery horse ever. But it worked.
Talk us through the moment when obviously the deal was done to sell him to Coolmore. Obviously, it was a huge moment because it propelled him onto the world stage. But it was there was a bit of contention around it as well. And Australians like to see their best horses perform on the global stage, but they don't like losing them as well. So it's always a difficult one, isn't it, Duncan?
Look, I got pilloried in the national press, all double-page spreads in the Sun Herald or whatever papers they were. But we were probably trendsetters, could even be considered, because now every good horse that wins a decent race, the first thing he's on the market, he's sold, he's rehomed, he's re-syndicated. Even when he's been bought by these powerful stallion syndicates, there's already a reconfiguration of the ownership of the horse. And that's really what happened with So You Think. We still owned a significant portion of it, but even the insurance on him alone was insurmountable to hold that together. And Dado had a partner, Tunku Abdul Maraman, who owned half the horse. So Dado had an obligation to him either to buy him out or do something about it. So the decision was made to sell him. I remember in the McKinnon, it was one of the wettest runnings of the McKinnon on the Saturday, and a rare visit was made to Fleming by Sheikh Mohammed. And he and his entourage came out with their umbrellas and stood in the middle of the mounting enclosure watching So You Think parade. The only time he came out of the stand in the pouring rain. And I reckon that put the jitters up Coolmore, because they started to talk more seriously. And he won the McKinnon. And Dado said, this horse will run in the Melbourne Cup. He's not going to let Bart down. It's going to run in the Melbourne Cup. So I would think that if So You Think actually won the Melbourne Cup, Coolmore might not have closed the deal, because they might not want to have been standing a Melbourne Cup winner. So he ran third in the Melbourne Cup. He was a bit fresh on the day, over raced, probably thankfully. And the horse went back to Think Big Stud. We had to wait for John Halley, who is still Coolmore's main vet. He was working at the Breeders' Cup, and he had to come out after the Breeders' Cup from America. And Michael Kerwin, then the general manager at Coolmore, brought him down to Think Big Stud, and they had to vet it. And we knew we got a horse who'd had a tie-back surgery. Now, not too many vets would pass those horses. John Halley did. He knew he could see what there was. He could see the potential for ongoing success. But Dr. John Halley took a big leap of faith on behalf of his clients who were shelling out a lot of money to buy a horse that had a tie-back surgery. So that in itself, while the press thought come Cup Day that it was all a done deal, certainly wasn't. There was a lot of hurdles to be overcome and a bit of pressure there for the ensuing week. And all the time we had your fellow journalists giving me a hard time.
Dardo had a lot of, besides, say, I think you said saintly, viewed a lot of good horses. But how did your association with Dardo start, Duncan?
I did track work for Bart Cummings. I was starting my fledgling DJR Thoroughbred services. I worked for a lawyer called Michael Ryan, who had Santa Anita bloodstock. He kept his horses at Taronga Stud. So I was like his bloodstock manager, had a little square metre office in Elizabeth Street in Sydney. So I did track work in the morning to try and get some money in. And Michael Ryan was a very good friend of Bart's, spent a lot of time with Bart. And one day Bart basically said he went to a sale and Bart said, I got this Malaysian fella, he used to have some good horses from years ago. He wants to buy a horse, but he's not giving me much money. Go and buy him a horse. So I went off into the Magic Millions and I bought a Son of Tate Gallery for $30,000. And Bart said, I remember Bart saying, you Poms, you keep buying these European breds, we want colonials. Anyway, that horse was called Capablanca. He won his first 3 starts before Christmas as a 2-year-old. He got into the Golden Slipper. He was actually near favourite for the Magic Millions, but there was a technical error in the staging of the entries, so he was not eligible to run in the Magic Millions. So my first horse for Dado was a good 2-year-old, ran in a Golden Slipper. He was a $30,000 purchase, and Dado allowed me to buy another one the next year. So I bought an Alzao. Same story. Bart said, you Poms, you keep buying these imports. I said, oh, you only got $30,000. I don't have much choice. Anyway, he was called Botvinnik. He was a good 2-year-old. He ran placings in stakes, might have been the up and coming or some of these stakes races. He was a decent enough horse. So on we went again, and I think the next one was Danarani. She was very underrated horse. She would be the autumn glow of her vintage. She won on debut Canterbury midweek again, sat 4 wide with Kevin Moses, still won. She then ran in the T-Row, the Light Fingers, got beaten ahead by Bill Mitchell's good filly, can't think of its name, and then she won all the remaining legs of the Princess Series, the Flight Stakes, the T-Rows, and the Silver Shadow. She then went to Melbourne and ran second in the 1,000 guineas, and the fact the 1,000 guineas was still only a week, 10 days after the Flight Stakes, so it's still possible to go. She got beaten, ran second in the 1,000 guineas. This was her first prep. She'd only been on the racecourse 5 weeks earlier. She ran in a Cox Plate. I saw a picture of all these reels of past Cox Plates. I keep seeing these horses that I used to have. She ran in a Cox Plate. She came back. She ran second in a Toorak. She was she was probably the only decent horse in the stable, and she kept that stable going in that year. She was very good. So she was a $50,000 Danehill. And so I got to buy. Dada said I'd never have more than 3 horses at any time. Well, at his peak, we probably had 50. So over a 25, 30-year period, we gradually increased his exposure to more horses.
We sort of got this image, as the association between Bart and Dado of these two, increasingly elderly gentlemen enjoying their time together, ownership together. Well, what was it like being in the middle of that relationship, Duncan, of 2 guys who are, very successful in their fields? Dado obviously incredibly wealthy, Bart just an absolute Australian icon of racing. How did you balance that role and your role between those 2 guys?
I've actually said in our sort of inner sanctum on a few occasions, they're very similar men. And one was white, one was yellow. And I said that to their faces. One was Chinese heritage, one is Anglo-Saxon heritage, Irish heritage. But very, very similar men, pretty much self-made, captains of industry, high intellect, tough but fair. And they actually enjoyed challenging each other. Dado would always tell Bart he got no money. Bart would always... I remember once in Bart's office, there was a man called Mac Whitehouse, and he had just sold, I think, the Chevron Hotel in King's Cross for something like 700 million. And we're talking several decades ago. And Mac was sitting quietly in the back of the office, and Darto was giving Bart the no money, I can't buy any horses, can't afford them. And old Mac Whitehouse popped up from the back and he said, "Shut up. How much money do you want? I'll lend it to you. I think you're good for it. How much do you need?" Bart roared his head off, and he used to always tell the story to other people how Mac offered to loan Dardo the money because he thought Dardo would be able to pay him back. So we had some fun. We had some fun, and Dardo loved going to New Zealand for the sales. That was one of his favourites. And of course, he would turn up in Australia just prior to the Caulfield Cup with an entourage, secretaries, bodyguards, people, flunkies. So the whole show would move down to Melbourne, and typically he would leave, go back to Malaysia after probably Oaks Day, might stay for Stakes Day, but we went to the rest table in the terrace at Flemington. At one point, he owned the Como Hotel in Melbourne. So it was mandatory that Bart, Michael Ryan, that I mentioned earlier, we all stayed at the Como. So the entourage was picked up, and we'd go to the races, go to the stables, have to go to Silk's restaurant was one of his favourites, plus the Flower Drum in Melbourne. So all these meals were had at these various places. So it became quite a tour of endurance, to be honest. And it was me, I was the organiser. I had to find cars, taxis, people, restaurants, bookings for all these mob of 20 people. So I went from being a bloodstock agent and racing manager to a flunky. So that was my role in those few weeks each year.
Dardo died in 2018, but Think Big Stud and his colours have continued on. And how, under your management, how have you continued it on and managed it, Duncan?
Well, Think Big Stud was purchased in 2007. Bart always admired Bart's Princess Farm, him having his own farm, and it's probably been recorded there was a period there when Bart was struggling. Dado came in and bought Princess Farm off him and then sold it back to him when Bart found his feet again financially, and Dad decided he wanted to have his own farm. So we bought the first section of Think Big Stud down there in Burradoo, 2007. Viewed won the Melbourne Cup. We bought the neighbour. So You Think won his first Cox Plate. We bought the next neighbour. So the original farm was financed by Dado. Prize money from racehorses bought the next two sections. And it wasn't till Dado died in 2018, and my board, which are the Tans made up of his children, who are my age or slightly older, they decided a policy that they would continue to try to race his colours in Dado's honour, but they were not going to breed horses. They thought that the breeding side was too long-winded, too expensive, and it's very expensive to run these farms. So the decision was made to disband the breeding side, and I'm not allowed to keep fillies for breeding purposes. That's just part of the edict. So any filly that gets sold off has to be sold. We sold Fireburn off. She's now Mullova, who's now the mother of Fireburn, the Golden Slipper winner. So if we still had the farm, we'd still have these collections of mares. The Dam of El Costello was another one. We raced her, but she was sold off as a maiden mare. So from those farms, we sold the farm, but the family kept racing horses. And it was probably I'm quite proud, in my 12th year of running the business with no external funding. So we've been buying about 12 yearlings a year for the family to race, along with partners. That's all been funded from the on sale of horses from the stable, the likes of Norzita we sold, LA Wonder. They made good money. Prize money, and of course, So You Think was chipping in a good whack into the pool as well. So we're 12 years in with no external funding. I'm obviously going to have to look at that funding model with, as Dado say, with a very sharp pencil now, because with the security of So You Think, you could forecast what you're going to get going forward. I will not be able to forecast with the same degree of accuracy because you're reliant on prize money. Are you going to win the Golden Slipper or are you going to run third? Who can tell you that?
Yeah.
So am I going to have another top class mare? Again, let's reference the Aussie, to be able to sell her to $1.7 million to buy more yearlings.
Yeah.
You can't forecast that. You can hope it. So yes, the budget's going to get a bit tighter, and we'll have to sort of probably restructure the depth of their ongoing involvement as Think Big Starters, the family.
And we see those colours in action, and they're such iconic colours week on week, and we'll see them at Randwick on Saturday, Duncan. You know, we've got a couple of horses.
There's two runners at Randwick, and one in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Adelaide, this Saturday. Glad You Think So. Clear Proof will resume.
Yep.
He was touted as a high quality horse, had some issues. We're over those issues. We'll see whether he returns. And Nordic Viking, well, he's found himself in a 3-year-old race worth $1 million. He didn't let down on a very firm Rosehill track last start. He got beaten 2 and 3 lengths by the horses that are nominal favourites for Saturday. So if we get a better track, a better surface at Randwick, or more give, which we would expect Randwick to do, we're going to find 2 or 3 lengths to find ourselves in the pointy end of $1 million race.
And plenty of sentiment involved there, of course, with being by So You Think as well. So
not that I'm saying he's a stallion material, but he's a colt by So You Think. You know, he's wearing the colours. Yeah, he's part of the furniture, part of the team.
And Duncan, how do you see the wider state of the racing and breeding industry? We're both at Randwick for the Everest on Saturday, and there's a lot of people there. But for someone who's involved in it day to day, how do you see the state of racing and breeding?
Well, as you know, my partner, she's one of the 4 remaining directors of the ATC. I think that situation needs to be resolved somehow. What I do see of these 4 remaining directors, and it's all unpaid, it's all honorary. They don't even get petrol money, let alone a sitting fee. And they're working very hard. And I won't talk about the policy because I might upset the apple cart. And they've got the show cause hearing tomorrow, I believe. But I will say that there's a lot of free advice being offered, a lot of opinions. A lot of people have said some rather cutting things about 4 people who are trying very hard to keep the club together for racing. And, you know, there's even people who have been in a position of power to do something about it themselves and haven't been able to make it work. So all I'm saying is that situation needs to be resolved. It's probably important not to win individual battles, but to win the war. For me, the conclusion of the war is to have an effective race club, effective racing administration, to have the breeders aligned, even the pattern back in the game. That's the war. To have an industry that has various sections that all work together, that are not fighting each other on the social pages or the newspapers or whatever, because there's a lot of depth and strength in racing, but it needs to be cohesive. And I see that as one of the bigger hurdles for racing. You know, you read about what's stuff going on in Melbourne at the moment and their committees and boards and what have you. Well, that's got to stop. That's got to stop. And there's plenty of people who can earn good livings, have a good life out of racing, get together. It's too factionalised.
It's hard to argue against it, Duncan. There's been plenty going on over the last few years in racing, especially in the last 12 months or so, and plenty of things to resolve. Thanks so much for your time. Great to reflect on So You Think. He was a marvellous racehorse. We probably undersold his. I haven't really spoken about his sire career, which was quite amazing. His stallion career, which is quite amazing as well. But I think the ability for a beautiful, talented athlete to affect the way we think about racing remains eternal. And he was an eternal horse. And he's a horse that will be reflecting a long time. He probably was a horse that was representative of the end of an era, you know, with Bart and with Dardo and with everything that went on. But we were lucky to have him, weren't we, Duncan? And we were lucky to have such a great horse to be able to show us what great horses can do.
He was, and he certainly was part of that era. Possibly why I got so upset, because I spent a lot of time with Bart, Dardo, Percy Sykes, none of them are around anymore. We've all passed on. So spent a lot of hours, man hours together doing stuff. And yeah, he's sort of reflective of the passing of that great era, like certainly that great era for us.
Thanks, Duncan. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Keep safe.
Yeah, fantastic chat with Duncan Ramage there and some really great insight, Tim. Just a quick mention of some other couple of breeding stories we've got hanging about. What I picked up last night, because, this is the things that I do at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, was that Mystic Journey and Seabrook's colts both sold for over $1 million at a Japanese Northern Farm sort of mixed sale, foal sale. It's a significant amount of money. Yeah, an interesting one, of course, Mystic Journey's colt foal is by Equinox, who we know a fair bit about, and obviously a significant horse in the Japanese landscape. 1.3 million effectively for him, and just over 1 million for the Seabrook colts. Let me just double check the breeding of that one. Contrail. Sorry, yep, that's right. Yes, by Contrail sold for 99 million yen, or just over $1 million. So, look, we've talked about it a lot over the journey, but these Australian bred mares just very successful in Japan. Magic Million's first digital catalogue's due out tomorrow. I'm interested to see what that looks like, Tim. We obviously had Taste of Heaven come into the sale early on this week as a sort of headline act. Jerry Harvey owns a horse, so obviously, that sort of helps them along a little bit, but that's interesting from that perspective. And Derby Racing also busy buying on English Digital, Tim.
They've had a lot of success, Cabalas and Robusto, and, the tried horses from different stables. And, well, Ian Baker's got the majority of them and done a good job with them. And the horses they bought yesterday, Coolmore had a reduction sale of their colt syndicates, the colts that aren't going to make the grade at stud. And as we know, they've had quite a few retired to stud recently with Switzerland and Home Affairs. So it's proven to be a good model, but not every horse makes it. And they go on to be good racehorses, a lot of them. So they've been sold yesterday through English Digital, and Derby Racing, Cabalas was an ex-Coolmore owned horse, and they've gone back to the well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, they often well anticipated these Coolmore sales, or these even the Newgate sales and other ones that go through the system. So it's an interesting one. I think, well, obviously the digital sales are going well. And you had a bit of a shout out too. You want to put out there too, Tim?
Yeah, John Jess, that a lot of people would know. He was Rose Hill for a long time, sort of track manager in Hong Kong, and the last sort of probably 25 years he's been working for a lot of the studs in, is doing the cards at sales in Australia, New Zealand. Probably hasn't been a sale he hasn't been to. He was at the Magic Millions 2-year-old sale for Tal Nolan only a couple of weeks ago. He's not in the best of health, JJ. He's a big supporter of myself on the straight. He's always been good to me. And I just want to say that he's a very popular figure. He treats, the top of the industry the same as the bottom, whether you've got 300 horses or you're a battler from the bush with one horse. He treats everyone the same. And just thinking of him and his family at the moment in Sydney Hospital, and his sons Michael and Dale. And Dale, some would know the name, or certainly be, he's the starter in Sydney, the head starter there. So would have started the Everest on Saturday. So just JJ said, very popular person. He knows everyone. Just thinking of you at the moment, going through a tough time, but he's tough as teak, and hopefully he pulls through.
On the wagering now, and this week we had Tabcorp's annual general meeting. Yeah, always interesting to see these meetings, and I think in the Gil McLaughlin era, which is fair to say that we're well and truly in now, it's been interesting to see the reshaping of the tab. We were fortunate enough to catch up with a couple of people from the tab over the weekend. I spent a little bit of time in Randwick having a chat with a few people, but also on Friday night having to run into a couple of people. The vibe around tab at the moment is exceedingly positive, and obviously the share price reflects that. I think 39 cents in September last year, and now $1.06, $1.07 for those who are lucky to invest. What is interesting with the tab, it was a conversation I had last week, which sort of brought this to my attention, or sort of reminded me, is that they have an enormous amount, for a corporation and a bookmaker, they have an enormous amount of sentiment attached to them in Australia. If the tab's healthy and things are going well and it's operating well, then it's seen as a net positive for the industry, regardless of the fact that obviously their contribution to the industry has diminished percentage-wise because of, the opening up of corporate bookmakers. The national tote's a really interesting one, Tim. I'm a bit of a cynic on this one. I was told last week I was being a bit too cynical about it. But, the national tote, I think it's too late. in my personal opinion, and I don't know if you're going to be able to revive parimutuel betting in Australia because you've now got a generation who's spent the last 10 years betting on fixed odds. But leaving that aside for a minute, what the national tote is, it is significant for TAB from obviously a corporate point of view to get it right. But Gil McLaughlin's identified this as a key measure and a key achievement for him moving forward to show that they're a company of action. For many years, TAB was seen as a company of inaction. Now they're seen as a company of action. The first 12 months have been very positive vibe-wise, but actually putting the runs on the board is key. National tote by the end of June or by June next year, Tim. Do you think it will happen? And B, what could there be? What will be the effects? Am I being too cynical here? Is it going to change things up?
Well, I'd like to see them. Well, will it happen? Well, Kill's been the tail to the donkey that it will. I'd like to see the percentages come down a touch, but what wasn't said probably was, I think, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, that they will come to an agreement with the corporates that a lot of that tote money or tote derivative money is pushed back into the pools, and the corporates will get a rebate of some description and percentage of turnover. But for the exotics would help, and even the win pools with things like that. That would make a bigger difference than just having one single tote. I think that the corporate money that may hold an enormous amount gets pushed back into the main pool and just get an earn off a percentage commission effectively. So I think that's an important part of this national tote if they achieve it, is having the corporates on side. Whether they have to go to court to achieve that, I'm not sure. I think if they get cooperation from the major corporates, sports bets and Ladbrokes and so forth, everyone else will have to follow. So I think that's a major part of the plan.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a key part of it. The other key part is a new deal for them in New South Wales, similar to what they've got in Queensland and Victoria. We've obviously got the Queensland situation with the review at the moment too. So, but the racing, the New South Wales deal is crucial because it will set up Tabcorp to, moving forward to be in a much better position because it's such a massive market for them. And obviously they're heavily involved. They sponsor the Everest. They're heavily involved up there, and they're probably more heavily involved in New South Wales racing because of the nature of the agreements that has been struck up there than they are elsewhere. So they need to get that market right. Probably expecting that to maybe be a 12-month, 18-month thing before that gets on the board. I know that Gil McLaughlin and Peter V'landys are working very closely on that. I'm not too sure. I mean, I don't know, if I was one of the other two racing codes, I'll be wondering why Peter V'landys has so much say, but he does, and he's very influential. And obviously the way that the funding boards work up there, Peter V'landys have a strong influence as well. But it's an interesting one. The other aspect to come out of it that Gil McLaughlin's incentive scheme got approved, Tim, which means pretty much he now has access, if all goes well and over the next 12 months, in 2027, he'll have access to $18 million in bonus incentives through options. Not bad work if he can get it. But there's also an argument to say that when Gil took over, TAB was, floating sort of less than under $1 billion of valuation. It's now sort of 2.8 billion. So the material uplift from the changes that have been made has been significant. As I said, a lot of that's been achieved based on the fact that things are going better than what they were, and there's been some good people put in good positions. The next 12 months of where the rubber hits the road, and we're really going to see that happen. But a really interesting time for TAB. They're a very interesting company because they're not your typical. It's a bit like the lkey rising market we were talking about last week, Tim. Sometimes you look at it and go, geez, it doesn't kind of make sense, but there's so much sentiment attached to TAB, in my opinion. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's the nature of the TAB and the history of the TAB within Australia. It does change people's perspectives of it and the way they see it from a corporate point of view. And TAB are banking on that. They want to see green everywhere. They want to see, the positive flow and all that type of stuff. And, they are upgrading their capability. They are trying to upgrade Sky and what they can do and everything else. So it's a really interesting time for TAB. The next 2 years will be crucial to see what happens. And I think probably in 2 years' time, Tim, we might see something a little bit different and, maybe a much bigger, stronger TAB.
Definitely, especially with retail and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and retail's a big part of that as well. Thanks for joining for the Straight Talk, brought to you by Inglis and Darley. Thanks to our guest, Duncan Ramage, and thanks to you for all listening. Don't forget to check out The Straight. Of course, it's moving to a paid membership model. And I urge you to go and check out that on the site and work through that. Some of our artists will start going behind a membership wall within the next couple of weeks. Check out the membership. Please join up. Use the early member code, which is available there to save yourself $20 a year. But we really want you to continue to grow and develop The Straight. The podcast will remain free and freely available. as will our newsletters along the way, and there'll be other news and stuff probably available. We do urge you to subscribe because we think it's worthwhile. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you've listened to our podcast. Send us an email, editor@thestraight.com.au, and let us know what you think or who we should get on or whatever else. And we'll talk to you again next week.